You know, there should really be an IQ test to become a supervillain nowadays. It's not all just menacing laughs and flashy capes, no. You gotta have that big brain if you're going to enact those big evil plans, and that's especially true in the MCU. We've looked at some of the best and worst villains in the MCU before, but now it's time to take a deep dive into some of the most ludicrous and head-scratching plans of the MCU's dumbest villains. Which villain tops our list and holds the title of dumbest MCU villain? Let's dig in to find out. Rule number 1 for creating an evil public face for your fake terrorist organization: don't copy a real person. There might be unexpected consequences like dividing the entire fandom. When Iron Man 3 released in theaters, audiences were stoked to see Iron Man finally faced off against his greatest nemesis, the Mandarin. But were shocked when they discovered the Mandarin was all a ruse and the man masquerading as the famed terrorist was actually just some bumbling actor named Trevor Slattery. The real villain of the movie was Aldrich Killian, who hired Slattery to be the theatrical supposed big bad, while Killian manipulated events behind the scenes for maximum profit. It was a good plan to make some cash by creating a new war on terror, but let's be real here, it wasn't that well thought out. Killian's plan could have been destroyed if the real Mandarin showed up debunking everything Killian was working for. And sure, maybe Killian didn't believe the Mandarin was actually real, but the terrorist organization, the Ten Rings, was definitely a legit terrorist group that could have easily ruined everything. Luckily, Killian died before the Mandarin chose to retaliate, but all that meant was the villain ultimately took out his vengeance on poor Trevor, who probably doesn't deserve it as much as Killian. When the most memorable thing about your villain is that he just wants his pet bird, then you've got a serious problem. Although the MCU is now an unstoppable juggernaut, it's easy to forget that when it first started, it was in danger of imploding before it could really begin. Sure, Iron Man was a huge success that kickstarted everything, but its sequel, Iron Man 2, is widely regarded as one of the worst MCU entries, and it was definitely the start of Marvel's lackluster villain problem that the franchise is known for. They cast Mickey Rourke. Wrong. Rourke didn't have much of a plan in the sequel besides bumbling through lines of dialogue and wanting to expose Tony Stark as a bad guy. But when your plan is focused on exposing a former war profiteer and weapons manufacturer as not so saintly, don't be surprised when it fails. Although he's played by Sam Rockwell, the MVP of mostly any project he's in, we can't help but point out how much of a dummy Rockwell's character Justin Hammer was in Iron Man 2, making the sequel 0 for 2 in terms of its villains. Although bad guys are prone to lose in these films, Justin Hammer seems to take the cake for just being an all-around loser. His first plan in the film is to damage the public's view of Tony Stark, but that horribly backfires and he's the one whose image is tarnished. Backed up against a corner, Hammer got desperate and turned a convicted terrorist Whiplash to help him replicate Stark's arc reactor technology. You would think running your own weapons company would make you at least a little smart, but no. Hammer was somehow surprised when Whiplash betrayed him. Oh, shocker! The villain from the MCU's second film, The Incredible Hulk, was a ruthless soldier who wanted to keep fighting for as long as possible. He loved what he did so much that he refused promotions just so he could remain in the field fighting. But Father Time was not on his side and he found himself slowing down with every passing mission. So when Emil encountered the awesome power of the Hulk, everything changed. Now, when most people encounter the destructive power of the big green cuddle monster, they usually need a change of underwear. Not Blonsky. He was envious of Hulk's insane power and agreed to inject himself with an experimental super soldier serum to make him stronger, even though it could have disastrous side effects. Of course, the serum only made him more insane and crave more power, eventually turning himself into the grotesque abomination. We don't know about you, but we'd prefer to be able to walk around in public without people running away in fear rather than having super strength. Maybe Darren Cross, the villainous CEO of PIM Technologies who creatively rebranded as Cross Technologies, had a good plan in his head somewhere, but after all was said and done, his master plan didn't seem to boil down to anything other than make money. But even after the overexposure to Pym Particle's unhinged cross, he was already making questionable decisions, like keeping Hope around in his inner circle, even though she was the daughter of his biggest enemy. Sure, Hope was actually against her father at the beginning, but she eventually saw what Cross was becoming and turned back to her father for help. Something Cross took an incredibly long time to realize. And then after that, when his plan to make money through, Cross didn't have much of a backup plan besides crazy revenge. So although Corey Stoll was fun in the role, the character was mostly aimless. Ego was a Celestial. He had a plan to conquer the entire universe via a massive undertaking called the Expansion, where he would terraform all life-sustaining planets to make extensions of himself. But if his ideal universe were just different copies of himself, then we'd be very worried about the intelligence of this new galaxy, because Ego had one of the dumbest plans of any Marvel villain. He did everything right on paper. He found Peter. He unlocked the untapped power within him and showed him all that he could do. Ego had victory right in his grasp, and then he casually admitted he killed Peter's mother. And it's not like Ego didn't know Peter loved his mom, with the two discussing her in length often throughout the film. So really, Ego should have realized that it was in his best interest to keep this information to himself. Peter probably would have been none the wiser, and Ego would have successfully accomplished his ambitious galaxy-conquering plan. If all the bad guys from the MCU met up and discussed how they were beaten, you would have to figure Ronan the Accuser would stay silent. Can you imagine how that would go for him? Loki would get done telling his story about how Hulk smashed him relentlessly over and over again, and then Ronan would have to stand up and say that he was beaten by an idiot who challenged him to a dance-off. But we were doubting Ronan's intelligence long before Starlord busted out some sick moves to distract Ronan, who was literally 2 seconds away from destroying Xandar with the Power Stone. Ronan, keep your eyes off of Chris Pratt for 2 seconds and everything you wanted would become true. But of course, this begs the question, what would have happened if he destroyed the planet with him standing on it? Would the planet implode, leaving Ronan floating in space alone? These are the questions we need answering. But even before all that, Ronan betrayed Thanos to keep the Power Stone for himself, which is a pretty boneheaded move on his part. Wong defines Dormammu as a cosmic conqueror, a destroyer of worlds with infinite power who's on a quest to invade every universe and bring all worlds into his dark dimension. But even though Dormammu sounds apocalyptic, he was still beaten by basically being annoyed too much. Although dangerous, Doctor Strange decided to use the Time Stone to undo all the damage that was done by Dormammu enthusiast Caecilius and trap Dormammu in a time loop, which saw Doctor Strange repeatedly appearing before the interdimensional being demanding to bargain. The only way out of the time loop was for Dormammu to leave Earth alone. But come on, how come Dormammu didn't just say yes to the deal and then immediately go back on it once he was released by Doctor Strange? He's a villain! Breaking deals is what villains do. When we saw Hela, Thor's older sister, finally make her presence known, we all had one question on our mind. Are we sure Loki was the adopted one? Because the trio of Odin, Loki, and Hela look way more alike, and the jockey, slightly Australian-sounding Thor definitely feels like the outlier here. But anyways, our second question was, why did Hela not make sure the Bifrost sword was secured when she walked right by it the first time? Although Hela was Odin's firstborn and also a seemingly deer cosplaying enthusiast with her horns and headdress, she maybe was a bit too cocky to really think out her plans. She wanted to conquer all of the 9 realms after retaking Asgard, but then was thwarted in her conquest because Heimdall stole the Bifrost sword. But it all could have been avoided because she literally walked right past it when she arrived at Asgard. Well, we guess there won't be a next time because Asgard is now a pile of space rubble. But it was probably good the Asgardians got out there. After that, there was nothing but smooth sailing. Oh, wait. Caecilius probably should have spent more time watching movies than studying to become a powerful master of the mystic arts. At least then he would have realized that bad guys who lust for immortality rarely end up happy. That's exactly what happened to Caecilius and his followers, who were determined to summon Dormammu and destroy this dimension because he felt like it. You see, the Ancient One was always spouting on about how the Dark Dimension was evil, but she herself used its energy to stay immortal all these years. This made Caecilius so mad that he attempted to bring the Dimension Eater Dormammu over to our dimension. At least he sorta got what he wanted in the end, with him and his cronies being sucked into the dark dimension for all eternity, and suffering horrific torture literally forever. Man, we're still scratching our heads at Ronan the Accuser's plan to destroy Xandar, but what about you? What was your favorite entry on our list? Were there any MCU villains you thought had dumb plans that we missed? If you wanted to go about destroying the Avengers and conquering the galaxy, how would you go about it? Be sure to make your comments heard below, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more awesome MCU content. As always, thanks for watching.